Welcome. It's Friday again. Another week has gone by. I'm about to have a tipple with some friends.
Is it a tipple when it's just yourself?
Well, I'm having a tipple, and the rest of you are drinking stuff that's a bit less interesting. George isn't around today. He's out in the wild, working hard, trying to impress his employer. So I've taken the hot seat of moderating my friend Tinashe and the producer of the show, Ranga. And before we go into what we're drinking, you don't drink, and but you've observed Tinashe, George, and I hang out, have drinks, and have all these interesting discussions. And yet this show was your idea. How did you come up with the idea?
Oh, well, I don't drink, but because of the nature of my job, I happen to hang out with you guys.
A lot of drunkards.
Yes. And over the years, I've had to learn how to be comfortable around you. And I think even in those kind of interactions, I actually realized that there were some very interesting conversations that would actually come out of that. And after babysitting you guys for a long time, I just thought, okay, maybe we can create something out of it. Maybe if you can just restrict ourselves, maybe the first 1 hour of the conversation when everyone is too lucid, and create some conversation, we could have some interesting enter into maybe episode 9, 8 of season 2. Looks like it was a good idea.
Yeah, no, thank you a lot for that. So unfortunately, I'm outnumbered by the teetotalers today.
It's our show today.
It feels good, isn't it?
Today.
Yeah.
And as always, what you guys are drinking is much less interesting than what I'm drinking. But perhaps Tinashe can take us through. You guys are having the same thing?
Yes, we are. I think this was the producer's idea. So I was under strict instructions to have Vumba coffee, and that's what we're going to have. It's lovely. The aroma is great, and it's strong coffee. I enjoy it, and so does the producer.
Yeah, look, it was. I think over the episodes that we have shot so far, Tinashe was all alone drinking something different just by himself. So it only made sense that the first episode that we are shooting together, I'll have to join him, and it feels good to be outnumbering the
drunkards.
And did you really have to bring this hopeful or just for?
Well, look,
Just
I think
for yourself.
well,
Honestly.
it turns out that we went to a conference somewhere where we actually brew interesting craft beer, which is Vic Falls, which is where this craft beer is brewed. Tinashe is always going on about how local is lekker. So this is our first local boozy brew that we're having. It's
That you are having.
well, yeah, that I'm having, and it comes in this fantastic container. It's called a growler, and it's a growler.
Growler.
Yeah, it's particularly useful for those living under management who want to be faithful to the statement, "I'm only going to have one drink." So they make a bunch of different flavored beers. This one is called, the one I'm having today is called the Casa Blonde. It's a very light golden ale. It's easy drinking. But they're quite innovative. So they serve, these growlers are reusable. So you can get a growler and send it back to the brewery for a refill. And they also sell cans. I salute their entrepreneurship.
I must say, in terms of presentation, it's actually very good. It's one of the best I've actually seen. I'm not so sure about the taste, but it does look good.
So because this is reusable and it's a craft beer, some craft beers aren't pasteurized. They do stipulate that you ought to finish it within 10 days of opening it, a problem which I'm pretty sure I'm not going to have.
And the most difficult thing for me today is I'm used to just backing some instructions, say, please don't overdrink. Otherwise, you'll mess up the show. Now we are on the set together, Faro. I don't know. I'm sure Tinashe will help me to make sure that we keep him under under control a little bit.
We'll
He's
try.
angering the show, so he has to stay sober.
Well, look, I'm drinking beer instead of whiskey, so it's
I thought
highly.
you've given up on beer. What changed?
Well, look, I have a soft spot for craft beer, and I really wanted to showcase the Scrawler from River Breweries, yeah, so I decided to do so. So this reminds me of our trip. You were invited to be a panelist at the ZNCC conference in Vic Falls, and I must say you gave a pretty interesting and impressive presentation. So perhaps we can start there. It seems Zimbabweans, both in business and government, love these conferences. We had the ZNCC conference. You were at Conference of Investment Professionals, IPAS. We had senior government officials traveling to Dubai for the Dubai 2020 Expo. So we love these things. And so perhaps before we get into whether these conferences are creative, perhaps you can speak a little bit to what you presented on and any interesting conversations you had with other delegates.
Well, it was very interesting. We went to Victoria Falls, and I'm not so sure I was expecting much, but certainly after the conference, there were a lot of key takeaways. I think what's more important is less what is said on the panels and on stage, but what is said when people are drunk. And so it was very interesting. I think what I can conclude, or what I think is happening in the country, is that I think a lot of people, a lot of businesses are highly distressed with what's happening with the arrests and what's happening at the auction. I think that's the talking point. That's like the major talking point. And a lot of people are wondering what's going to happen next. I think that there's a big worry out there. And one hopes, some of the authorities were there, one hopes that they caught one or two useful words and will go back and report that, industry is, very worried about what's happening. So I would say that there's a lot of trepidation and a lot of anxiety with the current monetary system.
Well, so if you think about capital markets, which is where you come in, the IPAS is basically an organization of investment professionals. And if you think about what's happening in local capital markets, the ZSC is trading at well above 7 billion if you use the power market rate. It's at an all-time high, pretty much. So what was the mood like? Were people excited, bullish, or was it similar to ZNCC where there was a lot of concern and worry about the exchange regime?
Okay, so for us, I think the major theme for us was on the future of finance. So we were meeting as investment professionals on a day-to-day basis. We are competitors, we are customers to each other, and counterparts in one form or another. But this was an opportunity for us to meet as a group and say, guys, okay, what's likely to happen going forward in our sector? And look, besides what you are just talking about in terms of the bullish sentiment on the market, there's also a lot of innovation, a talk of innovation that is taking place. Already, I think the last year or two, we had our first ETF being listed, and already
I think that's a bad thing. I saw one honorable member really going after it. What was the response from the professionals?
Well, I think we'll talk more about that. But I think generally, as professionals, we actually came out charged in terms of us being able to churn out new products. And I think what is lacking, obviously, is our maybe.
Did you just avoid my question?
Well, we're going to come back to it.
We're going to come back to it.
But
I wanted to speak to the fact that I think the problem we are having is maybe we are launching these products, but we are not educating the public about them, including the people who have to make decisions on them. So obviously that was one of the takeaway ways that I think we need to do more in terms of advocacy. But yeah, I mean, we are in the mood of transforming this market to take it to the next level. I mean, there's so many things that we can do. There is the commodity exchange that is already being mooted, and also the whole thing about derivatives that the Financial Securities Exchange is talking about. So I think this is the part where we have to play a leading role in terms of leading those innovations. As to whether the ETF is something good or bad, I think there's a lot to be discussed there, but I think the short answer is it's actually good innovation. I suspect that any sentiments to the contrary are actually coming out of either lack of adequate knowledge or some other motive that I may not know of. But just look around and see what other markets have in terms of ETF.
Elsewhere, we call it political hot air.
Well, look, he at this particular conference, he was voted. He's the incumbent vice president of the Institute of IPAS. So perhaps he's got political ambitions and he's starting to speak in a very politically correct way.
My interest is investments. I think there's a lot that I can do there. I'll leave the rest to other players and participants there. But obviously, there is a need for that interaction between us as professionals in this investment area with the people who are making policies and also the public, so that we are informing them. There's no need. It doesn't help to just create products and then you don't educate people.
But I think Tinashe brings up an important point, because he's alluding to some comments coming from very senior government officials that the movement that we're seeing on the power market rate is being motivated by the movement in the price of the Old Mutual ETF. And I think, just to put it, to use Tinashe's expression, to contextualize, if we go back to last year, June, July last year, we had the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange being closed for a month because in senior government offices, there was a belief that what was happening on the power market at that time, when it reached about 100, is that trading in Old Mutual and PPC was somehow driving, the Old Mutual implied rate was somehow the mischievous key ingredient in the movement of the rate. So is this deja vu? And if it is, is your community and the rest of us in business, are we doing a good job in terms of communicating to the powers that be that actually what's happening on the ZSE with this ETF has got nothing to do with what's happening on the power market?
Look, I think there are some engagements that are taking place. I don't believe that these people or the people in government are totally clueless. I mean, you have got Tuli there is the Minister of Finance. He's an investment banker. He
actually introduced some of these products.
Exactly. Right? I think he was very pivotal in terms of getting the ETF off the ground and I certainly believe that he's someone who is in support of innovation. So if he's going to be and I think on matters to do with
You're a former protege of the Minister of Finance as well, the two of you. So apart from being teetotalers, you both had the current Minister of Finance as your mentor. So you're biased. So the audience must know that.
No.
You guys are both biased.
I must say, I sort of interacted with him maybe in my sort of formative years. I actually did my attachment at Barbican at some point. So he's actually someone that I know that when it comes to these market issues, he really knows them. And given his exposure in other developed markets, he is probably alive to the need for maybe developing our market and make sure that it's deepened enough to attract investors from all over. But I think obviously there has to be a scapegoat. So last time it was all mutual, and then there is the current traders. Now is the ETF. And I think the problem is this level.
So are you saying that they sort of have these different scapegoats in a hat, and they sort of shake the hat and then they pick, and whoever comes out of that hat, that's the one that they target?
Look, I think whenever it suits them, they always come up with some name. And obviously, it's incumbent upon the players to then try and explain, because if this kind of information is not sort of challenged, you get a scenario where the public could actually believe that the ETF can cause that. But what is an ETF anyway? It's just a basket of, like in this case, is a basket of the top 10 listed companies by market capitalization. So it's more like a glorified unit trust of top stocks. So I think already asset managers are running different types of unit trust funds. So you are putting together top 10.
So it actually, what you're saying is it actually helps the common man.
Yes. So that
can't necessarily invest in the top
exactly.
equity companies.
At a go, you have got access to top 10 listed companies. So surely if the ETF can cause the kind of chaos we are seeing on the power market, then the same can be said about all listed securities, which is not correct.
If you remember, Ghana actually closed the stock market, right? Is this a precursor to that? Do you think so?
I think so.
In 2008, how long was it?
So it was November 2008 to February 2009.
Yeah. I think the biggest problem that we have is generally capital market investments are deemed speculative. So, for example, that's why it has taken long to get certain products launched. So if you are borrowing to invest on the stock market, is deemed to be speculative. And in any case, anyway, you'd ask yourself, what's wrong with speculating? It's part of the market. So you've got
price discovery.
Exactly. Actually. So you've got long-term investors.
In fact, if you're a student, truly, that's exactly what you would say.
Yeah. So there's nothing wrong there. But look, I think one of the takeaways from our conference was to say we need to educate our community so that they know that investing is good. You are an economist. Or what's the impact? What's the contribution of capital markets to economic growth?
If from Schumpeter's arguments, in fact, capital markets and credit are pivotal to economic growth. So without a deep and proper running capital market, it's very difficult for capital allocation to happen. And capital allocation must happen in the most efficient way. And that's why it's the cog. It sits in the middle, and it takes money from savers and it puts money into investments. So that is a pivotal role that capital markets play. So it's critical to economic growth. If you use Solo's growth model as well.
Okay, that sounds like a rabbit hole. And on that note, we have to pay the rent and keep the lights on. So we'll allow Tinashe an opportunity to powder his nose, and we'll be back. Welcome back. During the break, I was thinking about all the travel that we did. Okay, so you and I traveled to the ZNCC. You had a drive to Nyanga. We had senior government officials get onto a plane and go to the other side of the equator to a slightly different time zone, for these conferences to talk about, business in Zimbabwe, economics, finance. And I was wondering, because these things involve quite a bit of money, what is the return on these conferences? So forget these sort of, national organization conferences. If we zoom in and we take it at a individual company level, because the three of us have been in the corporate world for the last, for more than 2 decades, and we've attended many of these, in company strategy sessions or meetings, and there's this belief that if you leave your offices and boardrooms and you go to some resort somewhere where your phones won't ring and you brainstorm, you're likely to have epiphanies that will move the needle. But it's for a small poor country, for us to be having all this expensive travel to discuss ideas, does it move the needle? Do these things actually work, or are they just talk shows?
Well, they are talk shows. One thing is they do help the tourism sector. So I suppose that's one positive. But you know what? I'm divided as far as this is concerned. You know, I enjoy getting away and refresh. You know, just the whole idea of going away is usually good. And I think that's why people do it. It's not necessarily that they're any more useful than in the office, but you must agree that the idea of taking away the distractions, the everyday distractions, and
introducing new ones.
I don't know about that, but I think if you do it properly, the idea that you're not anywhere near your phone, you're not anywhere near the kids or just the humdrum of work, that in some way, in some way might help. You know, as to the actual benefits, I think one has to do an economic study on it, and I don't think so. I think you made a very good argument that when Steve Jobs went back to Apple, you know, was it because he was away in some highland somewhere in America?
In Hawaii or Bora Bora, you know, with his team, did they have some epiphany about how to take Apple in a new direction?
next level.
Or he had a very clear vision of where he wanted to take the business, and he just drove it.
I think again, if we go on, we go with Schumpeter. Schumpeter seems to argue, and I haven't had any contrary arguments to it, that change is incremental. So the whole idea of innovation is that it's actually incremental, and that's what he argues for. So if that meeting or that time away can result in just an incremental change, then that's enough, you know, because those incremental changes, when you compound them over a longer period of time, they give us the big changes. So that's the Schumpeter worldview, which I hold. So anything that can lead to simple changes, I think it's
if it was up to you, Ranga, I know that you like to watch the pennies. If you know, so for your team at IPAS, for those of us that went to ZNCC, for the team that went to Dubai Expo 2020, did it not make a lot more sense for us to just get together here in Harare on a much smaller budget and actually hash out the issues? I mean, one can actually make the case that in this country, we're not all singing from the same hymn sheet. I think the business community has their ideas, government has its ideas, labor has its ideas. Do we really have any business, you know, discussing national issues, you know, in our separate corners when we don't actually agree?
So I think from a purely financial angle, it makes sense to just have your strategy sessions locally. Also, we are mostly pretty much maybe 90% of the people that you would find at these conferences are coming from Harare. Or maybe if it's, yeah. So it means you can actually have these conferences in Harare. But I think what I've also seen is people tend to be very busy, you know. I mean, just imagine how many people within maybe your bigger circle that you haven't seen maybe in the last 6 to 12 months. So you could be actually staying in the same sort of neighborhood or maybe operating from the same office park, but might actually take you months before you actually get to meet.
I think Ranga makes a good point.
Yeah.
We had interesting breakfasts and little
Chit-chat-chats.
Yes.
with interesting people that we would never have done so.
Who actually we live in the same city
Exactly.
with.
So
but
you
we never
actually
get
had to
meet.
fly to the Vic Falls
Falls
to
so
meet
that-
someone who is like a road away from where you are, or maybe are sharing the same building. So it's important. And also, I've tended to see that people here are very competitive. So when you are here, you it's not easy for
I think
you.
Harare is a competitive market. I think I beg to differ.
You know, look, I think it is. You know, like okay, look at it in the financial sector. Is it common for someone working for this outfit to be meeting regularly with maybe his counterpart from the other business? So I know over the years as an analyst, I've actually learned that as analysts, we tended to know more of what was happening in different companies compared to maybe competitors. For example, a banking executive will come to me and say, Ranga, okay, what are you hearing about this bank? But you're expecting these guys are peers at that level. Maybe they might have trained together. They came from one institution. But because they are so competitive, they can't really have time to sit together. I mean, like, we are brokers. We are in the broking industry. How many times have you had a drink with a fellow broker? You know? So you have to...
Going away.
Yes. So going away, all of a sudden, you cease to be competitors. So you become maybe participants in a certain market. So it's ZNCC, everyone who is in business, they get to meet, greet in an environment where they are more relaxed without any worries or suspicions about, proprietary business or maybe losing your conduct and that kind of thing. So from that angle, from that angle, it makes sense. As to the program and the other stuff, I think it's mostly a talk show. I think maybe you need to go to the stage where
People
need
have
to
had
some,
a bit of a drink and they're more relaxed. And
yes, it's more interacting. So for us, we were there for like 3 nights, but we just had one day or maybe 7-8 hours of business. The rest of the days, we went on a skywalk, on a zip line. And you know what happened? I got an opportunity to actually meet colleagues that I speak to on the group, people that I had not seen or met physically. And I think the next time I'm going to engage them, it will be warmer, it will be better, because we would have had an opportunity to meet and greet.
Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, so I think that's the only value, that's the interaction and doing it away from Harare. If you do it here, you have to do with the school run, you have to do with, I mean, if your colleagues know that you are at some meeting at the Mikos, surely if something comes up at the office, they'll call you because they know that you're here.
This is fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah.
So next time there's an expo in Dubai, I think we've got the go-ahead.
The producer will fund our trip.
That's not going to happen. We need to get sponsors for that. But look, it's you don't get much from there, but the interactions are still worth the while.
So I think what we can all agree on, I think we've all traveled extensively within Zimbabwe, that we have phenomenal world-class resorts. And yet, compared to the other countries in the region, I don't think we get a level of tourist arrivals that's commensurate with how amazing what we have to offer is. So what do you think the problem is? Why?
Well, it's twofold. The first is local tourism. We need to increase the numbers there. But internationally, I think it's well enough to say over the last 20 years, we've had some serious problems with the name Zimbabwe out in the tourism community. But I think that what we need to do is to really drive the prices down, because we must understand where we are in terms of our tourism. I think tourism already contributes about 5 to 6% of our GDP, but I think that it has the potential to actually improve on it. And the only way to improve on it is to actually improve our public relations and the name Zimbabwe in the global arena. One area, this might interest you, in Jamaica, for example, a lot of the tourism is driven by the diasporans or people with Jamaican ancestry. Mm-hmm. And they go back to Jamaica, and it's a big market. And I think that maybe the tourism sector and the players in the tourism industry can target the Zimbabwean diasporans, because they have a bit more capital or money to spend. And whenever they come back, it's to encourage them to come to Zimbabwe as often as possible and to bring their friends as often as possible. So I think the first point of contact, because it's not 20 years ago where you had to go to trade conferences and invite people to come here. Mm-hmm. I think now you've got a diaspora that's out there in the world, and that should be our first point of contact. And then that diaspora then spreads the word to their communities wherever they are around the world, and then they bring in the tourism. So I think the first thing is to actually change the view or the perception of what Zimbabwe is. And I think that will certainly help our tourism sector.
Yeah, but even if we change the perception, I think what you brought up something quite important, which is how expensive it is.
Well, because we just don't have the numbers. Once the numbers start coming up, you expect the cost to reduce. The only reason why the costs are expensive is because the numbers are just not there. We cannot sustain the current cost structure of running a tourism sector. Take Victoria Falls, for example. I mean, it's very expensive to run a town like that. It's very expensive. And if I were them, back in my day, would have put a model to say what's the number of tourists you need to have in a town like Victoria Falls that will reduce the price by a unit. And I think what it will just tell you is you need lots and lots of people. Look at Cape Town, the number of people that go to Cape Town.
Yeah. I like that you mentioned Vic Falls, because I think if you think about our region, right, there are two markets that come to my mind: Mauritius and the Seychelles. So they're tourist destinations in the classical sense. They've got lovely beaches and they're resort towns, but they're also financial hubs. So there's a lot of banking and finance that happens there. And one of the reasons why the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange was set up there to be a hard currency exchange is the idea was to make the Victoria Falls a financial hub as well. So where do you think we've come short in terms of that vision? Because certainly in terms of the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange,
it has to be a package. You can't be nitpicking. You can't pick one thing and say the stock market is going to draw people in. I don't think that will work.
But if you have these lovely tourist resorts and activities, and it's a financial hub as well, right? So you
need to be clear. In strategy, you need to be clear. Why are people going?
Because the Victoria Falls can be both. Like people go to Mauritius to do
Mauritius?
Banking and on holiday at the same time.
So I think what Tinashe is saying is, so it's not like it's isolated. You can't isolate. It's not like you can isolate Vic Falls from the issues that are happening in the rest of the country. So you are trying to lure investors to the Victoria Falls exchange because it's a financial hub that you're trying to create. But the rules of the game are determined in Harare. And if generally the investing community is of the opinion that what's coming from Harare is not favorable, they are unlikely to be excited about going to the Vic Falls. Take an example of the exchange that you've just mentioned. So you've got an exchange in Harare right now, which on a daily basis, it's losing investors. I think in the last 18 or 24 months, on a daily basis, there's more foreign selling than foreign buying, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, I don't know if someone has actually done some work to try and understand why are these investors moving out, to try and understand.
You don't need to be a rocket scientist.
You see? Mm-hmm. So now, and yet you're trying to create a financial hub we should be supported by these foreigners. Is it thinkable that these guys could actually be selling from an exchange in Harare so that they can go to the exchange in the Vic Falls? It's unlikely. So I think we just need to create an environment where someone can actually choose and say, look, I think I like a locally denominated market because of the returns and maybe the currency and whatever. Or maybe they want to go purely into a US dollar denominated market. But as long as they are happy with the macro, global view. But it's not there. So I would think that given all the good work that everyone is trying to do, I think we need to address the global view, so that at least for now, we stop the disinvesting that is taking place on the ZRC. And that should actually spur some activity and growth on the Victoria Falls exchange. I don't think, look, when everyone is feeling bullish, we saw a lot of money coming onto the ZRC, I think 2009, 2010. You didn't have to do anything. The perception out there was positive. So
you didn't even need to sell.
Exactly.
That's the point I was making.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think it's all about improving the image. The same issue that you've raised that I remember there was a time when we were meant to host someone for our conference. And then as we were making bookings, the moment they indicated that they wanted to go to Zimbabwe, it was flagged. Mm. And this guy is not informed. We tried our best to try and convince them that, no, it's safe and all. Like, no, it's flagged. The problem is if I travel with this risk, and my insurance is not going to cover me if something
Happens.
Yeah, so things have to be addressed at the global macro.
If you remember tourism, I think it was in 2015 or 2016, the Ebola problem that happened in West Africa or West Central Africa. It actually affected tourism in the entire Africa. I mean, we didn't even know what Ebola was.
Yeah,
right?
because perception is reality.
Perception is reality. So those are some of the things that we have to deal with.
And on that note, we have to take yet another break and earn a little bit of money. We'll be back. Welcome back. In thinking about these conferences that we have in the business community, whether it's ZNCC, I think in the next week there's going to be CZI, you had IPAS, all these business bodies. And I think that they have these views that they communicate, and they also attempt to engage government and air their views. And it reminded me of a story that I thought is quite remarkable. A few years ago in South Africa, when Jacob Zuma was president, he woke up one day and he decided that Nene wasn't the best finance minister. So he fired Nene and he appointed in a little known person in the world of business and finance by the name David van Rooyen. And the business community did not accept this. They made so much noise that Zuma at the time was relaxing at his Kandla homestead in KwaZulu-Natal. He had to get onto a plane, fly to Joburg, and participate in an emergency NEC meeting in which he was told categorically that Van Rooyen could not stand as Minister of Finance, that the rand would go to 30, and he had to find somebody that would be acceptable to the markets, And that was the business community. They basically closed ranks and they said, this is not going to work. And they moved the needle. Now, in comparison to the South African business community, when you think about the Zimbabwean business community, it's unthinkable that government could announce something and the business community in this country would say, no, this doesn't work. And the question that comes to my mind is, we've got all these business associations and organizations, and they get together for all these conferences and meetings, and yet they're not taken seriously by the government of the day. What is the problem? Why is the business community so weak?
We must. I don't think so. I beg to differ. I think that we must acknowledge that when you look at the Zimbabwean economy, I think a lot of it is just driven by government. Look at all the prices from milk, transport, maize, every commodity, oil, forex, it's all determined by government. So what influence does business have? And I think that when you read into the political economy of Zimbabwe, you realize that all this was done by design. I think we have a very dominant government in our marketplace. And I think that limits the voice of business. Whereas in a market like South Africa, you find that from 1994, they had lots and lots of FDI coming in, and they've got, it's a $350 billion economy, and a lot of it is driven by business. So business is a significant stakeholder or stockholder in the South African economy.
So you say business in this country, we are less a stakeholder?
Far less. Especially when you consider, when you do the math, you realize, and I think we talked about this, right? That all our businesses are focusing on a very tiny economy, piece of the cake, and we're not looking even global. And then you have a lot of money that comes in as remittances and as aid. So the impact, you tend to find that government's role or government's ideas around aid have a greater impact than business. Because when you look at the business sector and what it's servicing, it's a very tiny economy. Zimstat just produced their GDP numbers for 2020. And it's very revealing. That tells you that a lot of our economy is driven by remittances and aid. It's a consumption or consumptive-based economy. And it's what, 65, now closer to 65% is service-driven, and that's consumptive economy. So business does not have as much power as the South African business or the American business. I mean, some of the things...
So if you're right that the business community in this country doesn't have as much power, doesn't it make even more sense for them to speak with one voice when they engage with government?
You are right. I'm not disputing that. But what I'm just doing is contextualizing that even if they speak with one voice, even if they do speak with one voice, unfortunately, that voice will be drowned by what's happening elsewhere.
Or is it because they get preferential treatment or different treatment? So, for example, in the current
divide and rule, yes,
in the current dispensation,
that certainly happens.
You've got the fuel sector that, for them, discussion about foreign currency and the auction and all the challenges incumbent with those two issues, it's academic because they are allowed to sell fuel in US dollars and import it in US dollars, and it doesn't affect them. So if the rest of us are jumping up and down and worried about how to import X or Y.
I think the government is excellent at that, at divide and rule. It's excellent at that. I mean, you look at the importers, you know, they're getting donated, literally currency for free. But what's happening with the exporters? You know, so I think the divide and rule actually helps government. But having said that, I mean, government sets the price for almost everything in this country. So what role does business play?
So I'll add that. So generally, you find that our businesses actually, like what Tinashe just highlighted, depend a lot on government business. So they are not independent. So obviously, they don't have the voice. The one who pays the piper
calls the tune.
Calls the tune.
Yeah, and so you've got so many things. You still want import licenses. You want your application for auction to be deemed to be on the priority list, and for you to get the allocation. Just look at that whole list of who is getting what currency. Sometimes you don't find some of the names that you're expecting to the ones that are pretty much driving the economy. So every now and then there's a whole lot of interaction between, I don't know whether I even call it interaction, but it's actually dependence. And also the other reality is there's been a history of backlash if you actually find yourself on the other side. So you need to protect yourself. And one of the kind of first thing that we hear when you are discussing the whole issue about raising some issue is you don't want to upset politicians, because when they come after you, they'll suddenly come hard on you. And so because of that, you can't expect the businesses to have some voice.
But aren't business issues different from political issues? You know, if you have an opinion about a particular economic policy, is it not possible to actually engage and address the issue as a purely economic issue without
let's hear what our audience. Let's also hear what
without being seen to be political.
Well, let's hear what the audience thinks about these issues, and we'll pick it from there. But we've got some questions from the audience.
Yes, we've got some questions. I think Tinashe managed to get some interesting engagement and feedback with our audience, and there are a bunch of questions that we've decided we would address in this particular show. So coming from Tafadzwa, you know, he thought that Tinashe, you weren't being fair on Ian Smith and his policies. He thinks that you know, the industrial revolution that we experienced during UDI, you know, built competent companies, and that our undoing, however, was the failure to grow these companies to attack regional markets. Simtrade would be a first port of call. So how would you respond to that, to Tafadzwa?
I think, Tafadzwa, you make a good point, and unfortunately, the rest of your argument, I would disagree quite vehemently. I think that once you start a company and it's inward looking, I think that's the end, right? because that's what Ian Smith wanted. Ian Smith wanted companies that would sanction bust and that would service the local tiny white minority and to some extent the black majority. But it was very limited to Rhodesia. So you can't then say, 56 years later, that company must be outward looking. I mean, ideas drive economies, ideas drive companies. Those companies are never going to be outward looking. So I think that what the ideology that Ian Smith started, unfortunately, is the ideology that Mugabe took over, and it's the one theme that's been running. So I beg to differ. I think we just need new companies. Look at it in America. There's an interesting anecdote in America. Well, it's not even an anecdote. It's a data point that the Fortune 500 companies, they have a lifespan within the Fortune 500 for 30 years. So a Fortune 500 company will last for 30 years within that group of the elite group of companies, and beyond that, a new phenomena comes and new companies come in, and that is necessary and that's what Schumpeter's creative destruction really means, that you have new set of ideas and new companies that then set forth the economic growth. That's how I would answer that.
Do you agree with that? Do you think that our manufacturing sector, because we make a lot of noise about manufacturing, which brings me to actually another question for you, Tinashe, before I go to Ranga.
I think let's have the audience questions.
All right, okay. So we have Zahia who's asking us here, will South Africa want Zimbabwe to reach its economic potential? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that definitely. I think there's an argument that's out there, and it's gained a lot of traction, that South Africa does not want to see Zimbabwe succeed. I beg to differ. I think that South Africa has borne some of the costs of the trouble in Zimbabwe over the last 20 years, when you get a lot of the immigrants working and taking jobs from South Africans. I mean, whether it's real or not, but that it's something that they perceive and that they see. So while it is true that Zimbabweans are contributing to the fiscus, to the South African fiscus, and to South Africa's growth, it is also true that Zimbabwe, seen as a pariah state within the SADC region, actually increases the risk within the SADC region. And I think that South Africa would love to see Zimbabwe resolve its case. I think it's also a question of it takes two to tango. So I think Zimbabwe has not been forthright in giving out its case on why it must change. I think people within the region realize that Zimbabwe is not yet serious enough.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that. I think that people who think that South Africa is happy to see Zimbabwe fail look at the world in a zero-sum game, as a zero-sum game, that if Zimbabwe is shrinking, then they must be gaining somehow as South Africans or as our neighbors, whether it's Mozambique or Botswana or Zambia. But I actually think that regional economics is it's not a zero-sum game. If the Zimbabwean economy is doing well, it benefits our neighbors and vice versa. And I think if we all got onto that bandwidth in terms of our mindset, we might steer the ship in a better direction.
And also, look, I don't think you can point to any one incident where you'd say the South Africans actually contributed to our problems. They actually they actually want them to remain an issue for us. It's mostly
people might differ with Thabo Mbeki and his impact on Zimbabwe.
Wow, look, that's politics. I think there were some other political consideration, but when you're looking at purely economic reasons, I think this has been mostly of our own making, the problem that we're facing.
Absolutely.
If anything, South Africa has actually provided some sort of a buffer. Just imagine if we didn't have a neighbor as big as South Africa, the 3 million or so Zimbabweans that are said to be in South Africa. Imagine if these people didn't have somewhere to go and try life, what the level of instability that could have been experienced in this country. And just look at how much we are benefiting from the diaspora remittances from that. Our families are actually being looked after. So if anything, we are we are creating problems for them. Just look right now, there's a COVID pandemic, right? Each country has had to import vaccines or whatever facilities to look after the people in their country. And if indeed there are 3 million people in South Africa, who do you think is looking after
care of them?
Yeah.
Well,
It's not like we are shipping vaccines to South Africa.
The South Africans have been very generous with their vaccine policy.
Exactly.
Because they don't care whether you are visiting, whether you're an undocumented immigrant. You can register and you can get a vaccine for free.
So is that the action of someone who would really want to create more problems for you?
For Zimbabwe, yeah.
They're actually looking after our people. So I think that's where that narrative actually...
And Zimbabwe is now a $15 billion economy. I mean, it's less than 5% of South African economy.
So we've got a comment here, and I suspect this is one of somebody who tends to agree with Tinashe, making the case that Zimbabwe needs an Austrian economics approach to the economy. Perhaps you can just, give us a synopsis of Austrian economics. Like, what does it stand for?
Yeah, but
what is it about?
Before I do that, I must say it gives me great joy whenever I hear Zimbabweans starting to speak to Austrian economics and actually understand and appreciate. I ran a poll around free market or government-controlled, and I think 67% of the people actually admitted that the free market, they would rather have the free market than socialist policies. And I think this is the misnomer between what government believes needs to happen and what the people on the ground believes need to happen. So in terms of Austrian, what the viewer is actually saying is it's free market. So Austrian economics is free markets. What it espouses is as little as possible of government control. And government is there to protect individual rights. That's the reason why government is there. And individual rights stem from our human rights and our property rights. That is what the government must do. And that's it. That's the end. Then everything else, in terms of regulation, the market will regulate itself. In terms of business ethics, the market will determine the business ethics. By business ethics, what we mean is, for example, if the consumers believe in a greener economy and believe that anybody who is still using fossil fuels must be punished, then it's the market that determines that, not government policy. It's really about the market. And the market, as we have seen, and we are followers of Ludwig von Mises, is when he was continuously asked by people what the problem was and what the solution was, he had 3 words: the market, the market, the market.
But you have a slightly different view.
No, I'm actually itching to ask Tinashe, so how do you deal with the poor? So the majority of people are actually living below the poverty datum line. So if you are pursuing a purely market-driven kind of setup, how do you then reconcile?
At the core of capitalism, at the core of markets, is mass production. So you tend to find that the poor cannot afford certain luxuries or certain essentials, whatever it is. And the whole idea of capitalism is to bring the price down to the level where the poor can afford. So the first thing is, we also term it supply side economics. Supply side economics says that the problem with the poor is that they don't have jobs. So supply side economics says, okay, let's expand the job opportunities, because if we expand the job opportunities, we have full employment, then everybody is employed. And if everybody is employed, then it creates its own demand. Then they will have, they will be able to afford goods and services. But the problem with welfare or welfareism is that it creates also its own demand. So if people don't need to work, then they will never work. And the problem with Africa is we actually don't have a wide enough and deep enough tech space. So we cannot afford a welfare state. And what we need are jobs. So it's not that we don't care about the vulnerable. In fact, capitalism cares more about the vulnerable than socialism. Because socialism is purely about distributing whatever cake is there. Capitalism is about creating a much bigger cake so that the poor can be lifted up.
And whose responsibility is that? Is it the government? Is it, the well-to-do people in society?
It's the market.
And what can you start off with? Do you start off with welfare economy, or you have to drive your economy first before
Supply
you start?
side. That's what we mean by supply side.
This sounds like a fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go on
episode.
to the next question. Yeah.
I'm afraid we have to wind up. We really appreciate the questions. Please keep them coming. And in addition to the questions, we would love to hear your suggestions of issues you would want to hear debated and discussed in this forum. So for the quote of the day, I was thinking about all the controversy around social media and how harmful it may be, and fake news. And I tend to be of the opinion that the news is taken far too seriously. And in this, one of my favorite intellectuals has a very cheeky opinion that I would I love to share with you. I'm going to read it so I get it right. It's from Nassim Taleb, from his book of axioms called The Bed of Procrustes. And one of the axioms is the following: I wonder why news suckers don't realize that if the news had the slightest predictive and non-anecdotal value, journalists would be monstrously rich. And if journalists were really not interested in money, they would write literary essays. So on that note, please don't take us seriously. We're just having a tipple. And if you find yourself taking us seriously, perhaps you need to take a tipple as well, or see a neurologist. COVID is real, so be mindful and be good. If you can't be good at it. Cheers.